I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the neon orange violation notice flapping on my windshield like a distress signal. My 1987 Kleinfeld 1009 sat in my driveway exactly where I had parked it the night before, its desert tan paint job catching the early morning Arizona sun. The military surplus vehicle had been my faithful companion for 3 years now, ever since I bought it at an auction in Tucson. I grabbed the notice and felt my blood pressure spike as I read the words printed in aggressive block letters. Violation: unauthorized commercial/military vehicle parked in residential driveway. Section 7.3 of Sagebrush Hills HOA bylaws strictly prohibits commercial vehicles, military vehicles, or any vehicle exceeding standard residential specifications from being visible from the street. You have 48 hours to remove this vehicle or face daily fines of $100. Contact HOA President Barbara Kleinfeld for appeals. I crumpled the paper in my fist and looked around the quiet cul-de-sac. My neighbor Mike was getting into his Ford F-250, which was easily twice the size of my Cuff. 3 houses down, someone had a work van with their plumbing company logo plastered across both sides. But apparently, my vehicle was the problem. The thing was, Barbara Kleinfeld had no idea what kind of hornet's nest she had just kicked. My name is Thompson, and I spent 8 years in the Army, including 2 tours in Iraq. I bought this house in Sagebrush Hills, a planned community outside of Phoenix, specifically because it was affordable for veterans, and the HOA rules seemed reasonable when I reviewed them before purchasing. Nowhere in those original documents did it mention anything about military vehicles. I had checked thoroughly. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the violation notice from multiple angles, then photographed my truck, my driveway, and the entire street showing the other vehicles Barbara apparently had no problem with. Then I went inside, fired up my laptop, and started doing what the Army had trained me to do: research, document, and prepare for battle. The Service Members Civil Relief Act was something I knew about in general terms, but I had never needed to invoke it before. As I dug deeper into Arizona state law, I discovered something even more specific. Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1808, which explicitly prohibited HOAs from restricting the parking of military vehicles by service members or veterans. The law had been updated in 2018 after several high-profile cases of HOAs harassing veterans. I spent 2 hours compiling a file of relevant statutes, case law, and documentation of my military service. My DD-214, showing my honorable discharge. Photos of other vehicles in the neighborhood that violated HOA rules but were apparently exempt from Barbara's enforcement crusade. I even found the original HOA bylaws from when the community was established in 2012, which made no mention of military vehicles. By noon, I had crafted a detailed response letter citing every relevant statute and politely, but firmly informing Mrs. Kleinfeld that her violation notice was not only unenforceable but potentially illegal under both state and federal law. I saved it, printed 3 copies, and decided to hand-deliver one to Barbara's house that afternoon. Sagebrush Hills was one of those cookie-cutter developments that had sprouted across the Phoenix metro area during the housing boom. Stucco houses in beige and tan, red tile roofs, xeriscaped front yards with decorative gravel, and the occasional sad-looking cactus. Barbara lived in one of the larger homes on Mesquite Drive, a 2-story affair with a 3-car garage and a front yard that looked like it had been manicured with nail scissors. I rang the doorbell and waited. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I could see movement. And then the door swung open to reveal a woman in her early 50s with an asymmetrical blonde haircut that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She wore white capri pants and a coral-colored blouse, and her expression immediately shifted from neutral to hostile the moment she recognized me. "Mr. Thompson," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I assume you received your violation notice." "I did," I replied, keeping my tone professional. "That's actually why I'm here. I wanted to discuss this in person before things escalate unnecessarily." Barbara crossed her arms, which I had learned during my military service was a universal signal for "I have already made up my mind and am not interested in your perspective." But I pressed on anyway. "Mrs. Kleinfeld, my vehicle is protected under both federal and state law. The Service Members Civil Relief Act and Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1808 specifically prohibit HOAs from restricting veterans from parking military vehicles at their residences." "That's a commercial vehicle," Barbara interrupted, her voice taking on that particular pitch that suggested she was used to getting her way through sheer force of insistence. "It clearly states in our bylaws that commercial vehicles are prohibited. It's not a commercial vehicle. It's a surplus military vehicle that I personally own. I don't use it for business. And even if the HOA bylaws said something about military vehicles, which the original bylaws don't, Arizona state law supersedes HOA regulations. HOA rules are legally binding contracts that all residents agreed to when they purchased their homes," Barbara said, her face flushing pink. "You don't get special treatment just because you decided to buy some ridiculous military truck." I felt the familiar tightness in my jaw that I always got when dealing with people who had never served a day in their lives, but felt entitled to lecture me about my military service. I took a breath and extended the folder containing my response letter and supporting documentation. "This is a formal response to your violation notice. I suggest you and the HOA board review it carefully, particularly the legal citations. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking you to follow the law." Barbara snatched the folder from my hand with unnecessary force. "The board will review this at our next meeting. In the meantime, the 48-hour deadline stands. If that vehicle isn't moved, you'll start accruing fines." "Those fines would be illegal and unenforceable," I said, still maintaining my composure despite wanting to tell her exactly what I thought of her petty tyranny. "But I guess we'll let the courts decide if you want to go that route." "Are you threatening me?" Barbara's voice shot up an octave. "I'm informing you of the legal consequences of enforcing an invalid violation notice. There's a difference." She slammed the door in my face hard enough that I heard something rattle inside her house. I walked back to my truck, sat in the driver's seat, and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of frustration before I started planning my next steps. This was far from over. The next morning, I woke up to find another violation notice on my windshield. This one dated for day 2 of the 48-hour deadline. I photographed it, added it to my growing file, and went to work at the aerospace manufacturing facility where I had been employed as a quality control inspector for the past 2 years. I spent my lunch break calling the Arizona Department of Veterans Services. The woman I spoke with, Maria Rodriguez, listened to my situation with growing concern. "Unfortunately, we see this more often than you'd think," she said. "HOA boards either don't know about the state law or they don't care. Usually, one strongly worded letter from an attorney makes them back down." "I'd rather not spend money on a lawyer if I don't have to," I admitted. "I'm hoping they'll see reason once the board reviews the documentation I provided. In my experience, Mr. Thompson, People like this HOA president you describe don't see reason. They see challenges to their authority. But here's what I can do. I can send an official letter from our office to your HOA board, informing them of the relevant statutes and the potential consequences of violating veterans' rights. Sometimes, an official state agency letterhead carries more weight than an individual homeowner's response. That would be incredibly helpful. I'll need you to email me copies of all the documentation you mentioned, plus the violation notices. I can have a letter drafted and sent by the end of the week. I thanked her profusely and spent the rest of my lunch break forwarding everything to her office email. For the first time since this mess started, I felt a small surge of optimism. Maybe this could be resolved without dragging everyone through the court system. That optimism lasted until Thursday evening, when I came home to find a bright orange boot clamped onto my cuck's front wheel. I stood in my driveway, staring at the thing in disbelief. The boot had a sticker on it that read "Property of Sagebrush Hills HOA Security Services," along with a phone number. My vehicle had been booted in my own driveway on my own property. I called the number immediately, and after 4 rings, a bored-sounding man answered. HOA Security. This is Lucas Thompson at 1847 Palo Verde Court. Someone put a boot on my vehicle in my driveway. I need it removed immediately. One moment. I heard keyboard clicking. Ah, yes. Vehicle at that address is in violation of HOA bylaws. Boot will be removed once vehicle is relocated off the property or violation is resolved with HOA board. You can't boot a vehicle on private property. That's illegal. Sir, when you purchased property in Sagebrush Hills, you agreed to HOA enforcement procedures. If you have a dispute, you need to take it up with the board. What's your name? I asked, pulling out my phone to start recording the conversation. I'm just the dispatcher, sir. You can contact HOA President Barbara Kleinfeld for any complaints. He hung up. I stood there in the cooling desert evening, looking at my booted truck, and realized that Barbara Kleinfeld had just made a serious mistake. Up until this point, she had been operating in a legal gray area, claiming ignorance of state law and hiding behind HOA bylaws. But physically restraining my vehicle on my own property was something else entirely. I called the Phoenix Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me an officer would be out within the hour to file a report. Then I called Maria Rodriguez's cell number, which she had given me when we spoke earlier in the week. "Mr. Thompson," she answered, sounding concerned. "Is everything okay?" I explained about the boot. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "They did what?" Maria's voice had shifted from concern to angry. "Lucas, that's not just a violation of state law regarding veterans' rights. That's potentially criminal restraint of property. Have you called the police? They are on their way. Good. Document everything. Take photos, videos. Get the officer's report number. I'm going to escalate this first thing tomorrow morning. The Department of Veterans Services does not take kindly to this kind of harassment." The police officer who arrived 40 minutes later was a middle-aged guy named Officer Patterson, who looked like he had seen every variety of neighborhood dispute imaginable. He listened to my explanation, examined the boot, checked my documentation, and shook his head. "HOA," he muttered, almost to himself. "I swear, they cause more problems than they solve. Okay, here's the situation. Technically, they can't restrain your property without a court order, but HOAs often argue they have authority granted by the CC and Articus that homeowners sign. It's a civil matter, which means I can't force them to remove the boot, but I can document this for your records." "What if I just cut it off?" I asked. Officer Patterson grimaced. "I wouldn't recommend that. They could claim destruction of property and try to sue you. You'd probably win, but it would cost you time and money. Better to let this play out through official channels." He paused. "Off the record, these HOA people don't usually push this hard unless they're trying to make an example out of someone. You piss off the wrong board member or something." "I existed as a veteran with a military vehicle," I said dryly. "Yeah, that'll do it." He finished writing his report and handed me a card with the case number. "You've got everything documented. That letter from the Department of Veterans Services should light a fire under them. If they don't remove the boot within a few days, you can probably get a court order forcing them to, and at that point, they'll be on the hook for your legal fees." After Officer Patterson left, I spent an hour taking photos and videos of everything from every angle: the boot, the violation notices, my truck, the other vehicles on the street that were apparently acceptable. I uploaded everything to a cloud storage account and backed it up on an external hard drive. If this was going to turn into a legal battle, I was going to be prepared. Friday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize and a voicemail from Barbara Kleinfeld that could only be described as unhinged. "Mr. Thompson, this is Barbara Kleinfeld. I just received a very concerning letter from the Arizona Department of Veterans Services, making serious accusations about this HOA's treatment of veterans. I want you to know that we take these matters very seriously, and your attempt to weaponize state agencies against your neighbors is absolutely appalling. The board is meeting in emergency session Sunday afternoon to discuss your violations and your harassment of HOA leadership. You are required to attend, 2 o'clock at the community center. If you fail to appear, we will proceed with enforcement actions, including additional fines and potential legal action." I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Maria Rodriguez. Her response came back within minutes. "Do not attend that meeting without representation. They're trying to intimidate you. I'm forwarding your case to the Arizona Attorney General's office. This has gone beyond HOA overreach into potential civil rights violations." The weekend crawled by. I researched Arizona HOA law until my eyes hurt. I found case after case of HOAs losing lawsuits over veteran vehicle restrictions, costing the associations tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and damages. I found the specific statute that made what Barbara was doing not just wrong, but potentially criminal. Sunday afternoon arrived, and despite Maria's advice, I decided to attend the emergency HOA board meeting. I wanted to look these people in the eye and see if any of them had the courage to defend what they were doing. I brought a lawyer with me, though. I had called an attorney who specialized in veterans' rights and HOA disputes, a guy named Robert Chen, who had been recommended by the Department of Veterans Services. He agreed to attend the meeting pro bono just to observe and make the board aware that I was taking this seriously. The Sagebrush Hills Community Center was a bland building that served as the neighborhood's social hub, hosting everything from yoga classes to homeowner meetings. When Robert and I arrived at 1:55 p.m., there were already about 30 people in the meeting room, most of them looking confused about why they had been summoned on a Sunday afternoon. Barbara Kleinfeld sat at a table at the front of the room, flanked by 4 other board members. I recognized 2 of them: Gerald Morrison, a retired accountant who lived 2 streets over, and Patricia Vance, a real estate agent who had sold several houses in the neighborhood. The other 2 were strangers to me. Barbara's expression when she saw me walk in with Robert Chen was something I wished I had captured on video. Her face went from smug satisfaction to panic in about 2 seconds. "Mr. Thompson," she said, recovering quickly, "this is a closed board meeting. Your attorney is not welcome." "Actually," Robert said, his voice calm and professional, "Arizona law allows homeowners to have representation present at any HOA meeting where they are being discussed or disciplined. If you'd like me to cite the specific statute, I'd be happy to." Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine. Sit down, both of you." The meeting started with Barbara reading a prepared statement about how the HOA's primary responsibility was maintaining property values and community standards. She talked about how allowing non-standard vehicles would create a slippery slope, leading to the neighborhood looking like a junkyard. She mentioned complaints from other homeowners, though she didn't name anyone or provide any documentation of these alleged complaints. Then she turned her attention directly to me. "Mr. Thompson has shown flagrant disregard for our community rules. When issued a standard violation notice, instead of complying like any reasonable homeowner would, he chose to make threats, harass board members, and weaponize state agencies against his neighbors. This kind of behavior is toxic to our community." I started to stand up, but Robert put a hand on my arm and stood instead. "May I address the board?" Barbara looked like she wanted to say no, but Gerald Morrison leaned over and whispered something to her. She nodded curtly. "Thank you," Robert said. "For the record, my name is Robert Chen, and I'm an attorney specializing in veterans' rights and HOA law. I'm here today representing Mr. Thompson, and I want to make several things absolutely clear to this board. First, Mr. Thompson's vehicle is explicitly protected under Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1808, which states, and I quote, "A planned community shall not prohibit the outdoor parking of a motor vehicle by a resident on a street or driveway in the planned community, if the motor vehicle is required for the resident's employment, and the vehicle has a gross vehicle weight rating of 10,000 pounds or less." But more specifically, subsection C states, "A planned community shall not prohibit a resident who is a member or veteran of the United States Armed Forces from parking a motor vehicle in the resident's driveway if the motor vehicle displays an official military or veteran license plate or a military or veteran decal." Mr. Thompson's vehicle displays both veteran plates and appropriate military identification. Therefore, any violation notice, fine, or enforcement action taken against him for parking this vehicle is illegal under state law. Second, the action of placing a boot on Mr. Thompson's vehicle constitutes unlawful restraint of property. The HOA does not have the legal authority to physically restrain a resident's vehicle without a court order, regardless of what your CC and Artiques might claim. Third, Mr. Thompson has not harassed anyone. He has simply asserted his legal rights and contacted appropriate state agencies when those rights were violated. The Arizona Department of Veterans Services exists precisely to handle cases like this. Fourth, and this is important, so I want everyone in this room to hear it clearly. If this HOA continues to pursue enforcement actions against Mr. Thompson, you will be sued, and you will lose. And when you lose, the HOA's insurance will likely not cover your legal fees because you were explicitly violating known state law. That means every homeowner in this community will face a special assessment to pay for the lawsuit costs, which could easily reach 6 figures. So here's what's going to happen. The board is going to vote right now to rescind all violation notices and fines against Mr. Thompson. You're going to remove the boot from his vehicle within the next hour, and you're going to issue a formal apology. If you do these things, Mr. Thompson is willing to let this matter drop, and we can all move on with our lives. The room was silent. I could see several board members shifting uncomfortably. Patricia Vance, the real estate agent, was staring at Barbara with something approaching horror, probably calculating how a lawsuit would affect property values in the neighborhood. Barbara stood up, her face red. "This is ridiculous. We have every right to enforce our community standards." Mr. Thompson signed the CC and Articus when he purchased his property, which means he agreed to follow them. "Mrs. Kleinfeld," Robert said, his voice taking on an edge, "state law supersedes HOA bylaws, always. This isn't debatable. It's established legal fact. If you choose to ignore that, you're exposing this entire community to massive financial liability." Gerald Morrison cleared his throat. "Barbara, maybe we should table this and consult with the HOA's attorney before proceeding." "We don't need to consult with anyone," Barbara snapped. "This is a clear violation of our bylaws and we have every right to enforce them." Actually, one of the other board members, a man I didn't recognize, spoke up nervously. "I've been reading the statute Mr. Chen cited on my phone. It's pretty clear. And there are several court cases where HOAs lost these exact disputes." "Mark, don't be ridiculous," Barbara said. "I'm not being ridiculous. I'm being practical. If we lose a lawsuit, we'll all be paying for it. My assessment is already high enough." Patricia Vance nodded. "I agree with Mark. This seems like a fight we can't win. Why are we even pursuing this?" Barbara looked around the room, realizing she was losing control. "Because if we let one person ignore the rules, everyone will start ignoring them. Next thing you know, people will be parking RVs and boats in their driveways, and our property values will tank." "Mrs. Kleinfeld," I said, speaking for the first time, "my vehicle is 20 years old, fully maintained and smaller than half the trucks in this neighborhood. I'm not asking to park an RV or a boat. I'm asking to park my legally owned vehicle in my own driveway, which state law explicitly allows me to do. This isn't about property values. This is about you not liking military vehicles for some reason." "I have the utmost respect for the military," Barbara said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "My father was a veteran. This isn't about that. It's about following rules." "Then follow the rules that actually matter," Robert interjected. "State law, federal law. Not made-up HOA bylaws that contradict those laws." The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Board members argued with each other. Several homeowners in attendance started asking questions about other HOA enforcement actions that seemed arbitrary or inconsistent. Someone brought up the fact that Barbara's own adult son had been parking his work van in her driveway for months with no violation notice. Barbara tried to maintain order but was shouted down by her own board members. Finally, Gerald Morrison called for a vote. "All in favor of rescinding Mr. Thompson's violation notices and removing the boot from his vehicle, say aye." 3 board members, including Gerald and Patricia, said aye. 1 abstained. Barbara was the only no vote. "Motion carries," Gerald said, looking exhausted. "Barbara, call the security company and have them remove the boot today." Barbara gathered her papers with shaking hands and stormed out of the community center without another word. The meeting broke up shortly after, with several homeowners coming up to thank me for standing up to the board and Robert for clearly explaining the legal situation. Robert and I walked out to the parking lot together. "That went better than I expected," he said. "Usually, these things take months to resolve. The fact that the board was willing to vote against their president shows how weak her position was." "You think she'll actually remove the boot?" I asked. "She doesn't have a choice now. The board voted. If she doesn't comply, the other board members will remove her as president." He handed me his business card. "But if you have any more problems, call me immediately. Women like Barbara Kleinfeld don't give up easily. She'll try to find another way to come after you." He was right, of course. The boot was removed from my vehicle that evening by a sheepish-looking security contractor who apologized and said he was just following orders. I thanked him and went inside, relieved that the immediate crisis was over but knowing Barbara wouldn't let this go. The next week passed quietly. I kept detailed notes of everything, including the fact that my vehicle remained unmolested in my driveway. I got a follow-up call from Maria Rodriguez at the Department of Veterans Services, congratulating me on the outcome and asking if I wanted to file a formal complaint against the HOA. I declined, hoping that the matter was truly settled. I should have known better. 2 weeks after the emergency board meeting, I received a notice in the mail about a special assessment. Every homeowner in Sagebrush Hills was being charged an additional $500 to upgrade security services and enhance community standards enforcement. The letter was vague about the details, but the timing was suspicious. I called several neighbors, including Mike from across the street, and they had all received the same notice. Mike was furious. "This is because of that whole thing with your truck, isn't it? Barbara's punishing the whole neighborhood because she lost." "It's possible," I admitted. "But a special assessment requires a board vote, and the board voted against her at that meeting. She can't just impose this on her own." The letter says it was approved by the board, 4-1 vote. That didn't make sense. 3 board members had voted in my favor and 1 had abstained. Unless something had changed in the past 2 weeks, I did some digging, making calls to the board members I could reach. Patricia Vance returned my call that evening and explained what had happened. Barbara convinced Gerald and Mark that the HOA needed more funds to cover legal consultations about updating the bylaws. She framed it as protecting the community from future disputes. She's clever, I'll give her that. She never mentioned you or your vehicle, but we all knew what she was really doing. "Why did you vote for it?" Patricia sighed. "I didn't. I was the one no vote, but I'm outnumbered. Barbara has Gerald and Mark scared about potential lawsuits, ironically enough. And the 5th board member, Dennis Kowalski, does whatever Barbara tells him to do. Can the homeowners challenge this special assessment? You can try. You'd need to get 20% of the homeowners to sign a petition calling for a special meeting, and then you'd need a majority vote to overturn the assessment. It's a high bar. Most people will just pay the $500 rather than fight." She was right. Over the next few days, I talked to dozens of neighbors, and while many were upset about the special assessment, most didn't want to get involved in HOA politics. "It's not worth the hassle," was the common refrain. "Just pay it and move on." But I couldn't move on. This was a blatant retaliation, and allowing Barbara to get away with it would only embolden her future behavior. I spent my evenings going door to door, collecting signatures on a petition. Some people signed immediately. Others needed convincing. A few slammed doors in my face. After 2 weeks of persistent effort, I had signatures from 38% of the homeowners, more than enough to call a special meeting. I submitted the petition to the HOA board via certified mail and waited for their response. The response came in the form of Barbara Kleinfeld showing up at my door at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I opened the door to find her standing there with her arms crossed and her lips pursed in disapproval. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk." "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Mrs. Kleinfeld." "Oh, I think we do. This petition of yours is tearing apart our community. Neighbors are fighting with neighbors. People are taking sides. Is this really what you want?" "What I want is for you to stop abusing your position as HOA president to punish residents who don't bow to your every whim." Barbara's expression hardened. "I am trying to maintain community standards, something you seem incapable of understanding. Community standards that violate state law." Your vehicle is an eyesore. It belongs in a military surplus lot, not a residential neighborhood. And there it was, the real reason behind all of this. Barbara simply didn't like the way my truck looked. All the talk about bylaws and property values was just window dressing for personal aesthetic preference. Mrs. Kleinfeld, my vehicle is legal, registered, insured, and protected by state law. Your personal opinion about how it looks is irrelevant. Everything in this neighborhood affects property values, Barbara insisted. When I sell my house in a few years, I don't want prospective buyers seeing military trucks and work vans all over the place. Then maybe you should have bought in a community without an HOA where you could control what you see. But in this community, you have to follow the law like everyone else. Barbara stepped closer, her voice dropping to something almost threatening. You're going to regret this, Mr. Thompson. I have friends in this community. Important friends, people who can make your life very difficult. Is that a threat? I pulled out my phone and started recording. Barbara noticed the phone and stepped back quickly. Of course not. I'm simply stating facts. Have a good evening. She turned and walked back to her car, and I watched her drive away before closing my door and saving the video to my growing file of evidence. The special homeowners meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon 3 weeks after I submitted my petition. The community center was packed with over 200 residents, far more than had attended the previous emergency board meeting. The atmosphere was tense, with clear divisions visible in how people grouped themselves. On one side of the room were the residents who supported my petition to overturn the special assessment. On the other were Barbara's supporters, older homeowners mostly, who seemed to view any challenge to HOA authority as an attack on order and civility. Barbara called the meeting to order and immediately went on the offensive. Before we begin the vote on Mr. Thompson's petition, I want to remind everyone what's at stake here. This special assessment was approved to protect our community from costly legal disputes. If we overturn it, we'll be vulnerable to lawsuits and violations that could cost us far more than $500 per household. I raised my hand. Point of order. The special assessment was implemented as retaliation for my assertion of legal rights under state law. That's the real reason we're here. That's your opinion, Mr. Thompson, not a fact. It's the opinion of most people in this room, Mike called out from the back. The timing is pretty suspicious, Barbara. Several people murmured in agreement. Barbara's face flushed red. The timing is coincidental. The board has been discussing security upgrades for months. Then show us the meeting minutes from those discussions, Patricia Vance said from her seat on the board table. Because I don't remember any conversations about security upgrades before we voted on the special assessment. Barbara shot Patricia a venomous look but didn't respond directly. Instead, she called for the vote. All in favor of overturning the special assessment, raise your hands. Hands went up across the room. I counted quickly. It looked close. Barbara counted more slowly, her lips moving as she tallied. Finally, she announced the results. The motion fails. 92 votes in favor of overturning, 108 opposed. The special assessment stands. The room erupted in arguments. People shouted at each other about fairness, legal rights, and community values. I sat quietly, doing my own math. Something didn't add up. According to HOA records, there were 346 households in Sagebrush Hills. Only 200 votes had been counted, yet Barbara had declared a result. Mrs. Kleinfeld, I called out over the chaos. What about the homeowners who aren't present? Do they get to vote? Votes must be cast in person at the meeting, Barbara replied smoothly. That's not what the HOA bylaws say, Patricia interjected. Absent homeowners can submit proxy votes in writing up to 24 hours before a special meeting. Were any proxy votes submitted? I asked. Barbara hesitated just long enough to make her lie obvious. No. No proxy votes were received. That's strange, Patricia said, standing up, because I personally delivered 15 proxy votes to the HOA office yesterday afternoon, all of them voting to overturn the special assessment. The room went silent. Barbara's face had gone from red to pale. I don't have any record of receiving those votes. I have the signed receipts from the HOA property manager confirming their receipt, Patricia said, pulling papers from her bag. Care to revise your count? Barbara looked around desperately, but there was no way out. She had been caught manipulating the vote results. Gerald Morrison stood up, looking grim. This meeting is adjourned pending an investigation into voting irregularities. The special assessment is suspended until the matter is resolved. People filed out of the community center in clusters, some celebrating the partial victory, others still angry about the whole situation. I caught up with Patricia in the parking lot. Thank you for that, I said. How did you know Barbara would lie about the proxy votes? Patricia smiled grimly. Because I know Barbara. She's been on this board for 6 years, and this isn't the first time she's bent the rules to get what she wants. Usually, people are too apathetic to challenge her, but you actually stood up to her, and it exposed her tactics to everyone. What happens now? The board will investigate, though with Barbara as president, I'm not confident about the outcome. But you've got another option. You can file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They oversee HOA compliance with state law. If they find Barbara manipulated a vote, she could be removed from the board, and the entire election could be invalidated. I filed the complaint on Monday morning. The paperwork was extensive, requiring detailed documentation of everything that had happened. The original violation notice, the boot, the special assessment, the manipulated vote count. I included witness statements from Patricia and several other homeowners, along with copies of the proxy votes and receipts. The Arizona Department of Real Estate assigned an investigator named Karen Stevens to the case. Yes, I appreciated the irony of an investigator named Karen investigating an HOA Karen. She contacted me 2 days after I filed the complaint and arranged to meet at my house to review the documentation and see the vehicle that had started this entire mess. Karen Stevens was in her 30s, professional and thorough. She spent an hour looking through my files, taking notes, and asking detailed questions about the timeline of events. Then she walked outside to examine my CUF. Military surplus, she asked, circling the truck. 1987 Chevrolet CUF 1009. Bought it at auction in Tucson 3 years ago. It's basically a modified Chevy Blazer with a diesel engine. Nothing fancy. And this is what Mrs. Kleinfeld had such a problem with. Karen shook her head. I've investigated cases where veterans were parking actual decommissioned tanks in their driveways. This doesn't even rate on the controversial scale. Apparently it offends her aesthetic sensibilities. Well, her aesthetic sensibilities don't supersede state law. Karen took photos of the truck from several angles. Based on what you've shown me, this is a pretty clear-cut case of HOA overreach and possible vote manipulation. The proxy vote issue is especially concerning. That's a serious violation of the HOA's fiduciary duty to homeowners. What's the timeline for the investigation? I'll need to interview the other board members and review the HOA's official records. Probably 3 to 4 weeks. If I find evidence of wrongdoing, I'll issue a report and recommend enforcement actions. Those could include fines against the HOA, removal of board members, or requiring the HOA to hold new elections. Karen left, and I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in weeks, but Barbara wasn't done yet. The following week, I received a notice that the HOA was placing a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $3,700. According to the notice, I had violated multiple bylaws over the past month, including failure to maintain landscaping standards, excessive noise violations, and unauthorized modifications to property exterior. Every single claim was fabricated. My landscaping was identical to most houses in the neighborhood. I hadn't made any noise violations, and I hadn't modified anything about my property's exterior. This was pure retaliation, documented and blatant. I photographed everything, documented the falseness of each claim with time-stamped photos and neighbor testimony, and immediately forwarded everything to Karen Stevens and Robert Chen. Robert called me within an hour. "Lucas, this is good news." How is a fraudulent lien on my property good news? Because Barbara just handed us proof of retaliation and abuse of authority. A lien is a serious action. Placing one based on false claims is potentially criminal. We can get this removed and use it as evidence in a lawsuit. I don't want to sue the HOA. I just want to be left alone to live in my house. I understand, but Barbara has escalated this beyond a simple dispute. She's actively trying to damage your financial well-being with a fraudulent lien. That affects your credit, your ability to refinance or sell your home, everything. We need to respond forcefully. Robert filed an emergency motion in Maricopa County Superior Court to remove the lien and issue a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from taking any further enforcement actions against me. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Judge Michelle Ortega was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had a reputation for being tough on frivolous lawsuits and abuse of legal processes. She listened to Robert present our case, reviewed the extensive documentation, and then turned her attention to the HOA's attorney, a nervous-looking young man named Bradley Harrison, who clearly had not been fully briefed on the situation. "Mr. Harrison, can you explain why your client placed a lien on Mr. Thompson's property based on violations that appear to have no factual basis?" Judge Ortega asked. Bradley shuffled through his papers. "Your Honor, the HOA board determined that Mr. Thompson was in violation of multiple bylaws based on reports from neighborhood inspections. You have documentation of these inspections, photos, inspector reports. I believe the HOA president has that information, Your Honor." "You believe? You filed a lien without reviewing the underlying evidence." The board assured me that proper procedures were followed. Judge Ortega looked unimpressed. "Mr. Harrison, I'm looking at photos Mr. Thompson submitted showing his property in full compliance with every reasonable standard. I'm also reading witness statements from multiple neighbors confirming no noise violations or other issues. Unless you can provide concrete evidence supporting these violations right now, I'm inclined to grant Mr. Thompson's motion." Bradley made a phone call, presumably to Barbara, but apparently received no useful information. He turned back to the judge and admitted he had no documentation to support the lien. Judge Ortega's ruling was swift and harsh. The lien is removed immediately. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to issue a formal written apology to Mr. Thompson and to remove all reference to this lien from any documents. Mr. Thompson, you're free to file for damages if you've suffered any financial harm from this lien." "Your Honor," Robert said, We'd also like to request that the court order the HOA to cease all enforcement actions against Mr. Thompson related to his vehicle, given the established protection under Arizona state law. Granted. The HOA is hereby ordered to cease any and all enforcement actions related to Mr. Thompson's military vehicle. Any violation of this order will result in contempt charges and substantial fines. Judge Ortega looked directly at Bradley. Mr. Harrison, I suggest you have a serious conversation with your client about the consequences of abusing HOA authority and filing frivolous liens. I don't like my courtroom being used for retaliation. We left the courthouse victorious, but I knew this still wasn't over. Barbara had escalated at every turn, and I doubted a court order would suddenly make her reasonable. I was right. 2 days after the hearing, my cuck's tires were slashed, all 4 of them, cut deeply enough that they couldn't be repaired. I discovered the damage when I went out to my truck Thursday morning to drive to work. This time, I didn't hesitate. I called the police immediately and reported it as vandalism. Officer Patterson responded again, and he looked troubled when he saw the damage. "You think it's the HOA president?" he asked. "I don't have proof, but the timing is awfully suspicious. Court ordered her to leave me alone 2 days ago, and now this happens." "You have security cameras." I didn't, which I now realized was a mistake. "No, but several of my neighbors do. Maybe one of them caught something." Officer Patterson and I spent the next hour canvassing the neighborhood. Mike had a Ring doorbell camera that faced the street, and when we reviewed the footage, we found exactly what we were looking for. At 2:37 a.m. that morning, a figure in dark clothing had walked up my driveway, spent about 5 minutes crouched by my truck, and then walked away. The video quality wasn't good enough to identify the person definitively, but we could see it was a woman of medium height and build. "That could be anyone," Officer Patterson said. "But combined with the pattern of harassment, it's worth investigating further. I'll file a report and follow up with some interviews." The investigation didn't take long. 2 days later, Officer Patterson called me with an update. "We got her. One of your neighbors, 3 houses down, has a camera that caught a clearer angle." Barbara Kleinfeld walked past at 2:35 a.m. heading toward your house, then walked back at 2:43 a.m. When we interviewed her, she claimed she was just taking a late-night walk, but she couldn't explain why she was walking specifically down your street at that hour. "Is she being charged? Criminal mischief and vandalism. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office is reviewing the case. Given the documented pattern of harassment and the violation of a court order, they're taking it seriously. She'll probably be offered a plea deal, but at minimum, she's looking at probation, restitution, and mandatory removal from the HOA board." I should have felt victorious, but mostly I just felt tired. This entire situation had consumed 3 months of my life. 3 months of stress, legal fees, and neighborhood drama, all because one person couldn't accept that state law protected my right to park my truck in my own driveway. The criminal case moved forward over the next several weeks. Barbara hired a lawyer and initially pleaded not guilty, but when the prosecutor showed her the video evidence and the documentation of her harassment campaign, she accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to criminal mischief, was sentenced to 2 years probation, ordered to pay restitution for my tires plus damages, and permanently removed from the HOA board. The Arizona Department of Real Estate completed their investigation and issued a scathing report finding that Barbara had violated multiple HOA regulations, manipulated vote counts, and abused her authority as board president. The department imposed fines on the HOA and required them to hold new board elections within 60 days. The special assessment was officially overturned, and every homeowner who had paid received a refund. The HOA also issued a formal apology to me and updated their bylaws to explicitly acknowledge Arizona state law protections for veteran vehicle parking. Patricia Vance ran for HOA president in the new election and won by a landslide. One of her first acts was to establish clearer guidelines for enforcement actions and to create an appeals process so homeowners couldn't be railroaded by a vindictive board member. Life in Sagebrush Hills slowly returned to normal. My cuck sat unmolested in my driveway. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak up during Barbara's reign started being friendlier. Mike and I became good friends, often working on our vehicles together in our driveways on weekends. 6 months after the whole ordeal ended, I received a letter from the Arizona Department of Veterans Services. They were using my case as an example in their outreach to veterans about their rights regarding HOA disputes. Maria Rodriguez called to thank me for standing up for myself, and by extension, for other veterans facing similar harassment. "You could have just moved the truck to storage and avoided all this," she said. "Why didn't you?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. Because it wasn't right. I served this country for 8 years. I followed orders, did my duty, and came home to build a life. And I'll be damned if some petty tyrant with a gavel and a clipboard is going to tell me I can't park my legally owned vehicle in my own driveway. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Well, your stand helped us strengthen enforcement of veteran protections across the state, so thank you. I hung up and looked out my window at my cuck, sitting proudly in the Arizona sun, its veteran plates gleaming. It was just a truck, a piece of military surplus that I had bought at auction because it was reliable and affordable. But it had become a symbol of something more important, the principle that rights matter, that laws exist for a reason, and that ordinary people can stand up to those who abuse power. Barbara Kleinfeld eventually moved out of Sagebrush Hills. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that her criminal record made it difficult for her to find another HOA to terrorize, which seemed like poetic justice. Her house sold quickly, and a young family with 3 kids moved in. They had a lifted Jeep Wrangler that they parked in their driveway without any complaints from anyone. Patricia proved to be an excellent HOA president. She focused on actual community improvement projects, like repairing the playground and organizing neighborhood events, rather than nitpicking people's vehicles and landscaping choices. The community became friendlier, more relaxed. People actually seemed to enjoy living there. I learned several valuable lessons from the whole experience. First, know your rights. If I hadn't researched Arizona law regarding veteran vehicle protections, I might have caved to Barbara's demands and moved my truck, setting a precedent that would have affected other veterans in the neighborhood. Second, document everything. The extensive paper trail I created was crucial in every legal proceeding. Third, don't back down from bullies, but choose your battles wisely and fight them the right way, through proper legal channels. Most importantly, I learned that communities are only as good as the people who lead them. Barbara had turned the HOA into a weapon for enforcing her personal preferences and punishing those who challenged her. Patricia transformed it into what it was supposed to be, a tool for improving the community and resolving disputes fairly. On a warm evening in late fall, almost a year after the violation notice that started everything, Mike and I were working on his truck in his driveway when a car pulled up. A young man in army fatigues got out and walked over to us. "Excuse me, are you Lucas Thompson?" he asked. "That's me. I'm Corporal James Chen. I'm stationed at Luke Air Force Base, and I'm looking at houses in this neighborhood." My realtor mentioned you had some issues with the HOA about parking a military vehicle. I wanted to ask if it's really okay to park here now, or if I should look elsewhere. I pointed at my cuck sitting peacefully in my driveway. See that truck? It's protected by Arizona state law, and so will yours be. The HOA tried to fight it and lost badly. You're welcome to park any military or veteran vehicle here without any problems. Corporal Chen smiled with relief. That's great to hear. I've got a Humvee I bought at auction, and every realtor keeps telling me I'll have to rent storage for it. It's nice to know there are places where veterans' rights are actually respected. They're respected here now, I said. And if anyone gives you trouble, you let me know. He thanked us and left to continue his house hunting. Mike turned to me and grinned. Look at you, the neighborhood advocate for veterans' rights. Somebody's got to be, I replied, and that was the truth of it. The fight with Barbara and the HOA had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had achieved something worthwhile. It had established clearly that state law protecting veterans would be enforced in our community. It had removed a toxic leader and replaced her with someone who actually cared about the community's well-being. And it had shown other residents that they didn't have to accept arbitrary rules and abuse of authority. My cuck still sits in my driveway today, a year and a half after this all began. It runs perfectly, gets me where I need to go, and reminds me every time I look at it that standing up for what's right matters, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. The neighborhood has continued to improve under Patricia's leadership. The contentious atmosphere that existed during Barbara's reign has been replaced with actual community spirit. People organize block parties. We help each other with yard work and home repairs. The HOA focuses on maintaining common areas and organizing community events, rather than measuring grass height and policing vehicle choices. I still see remnants of Barbara's impact sometimes. There are a few older residents who supported her and still seem to resent me for challenging the old order. They don't speak to me, which is fine, but the majority of the neighborhood appreciates what happened. Several people have told me they were waiting for someone to stand up to Barbara, but didn't have the courage to do it themselves. Robert Chen and I stayed in touch. He's used my case as a teaching example in several seminars about veteran rights and HOA law. He says it's a perfect illustration of why these protections exist and what happens when HOAs ignore them. The case has been cited in several subsequent legal proceedings involving similar disputes across Arizona. Maria Rodriguez at the Department of Veterans Services tells me that reports of HOA harassment against veterans have decreased significantly since my case became public. HOA boards are more aware that there are real consequences for violating state law protecting veterans' rights. That knowledge alone has probably prevented dozens of situations like mine from ever occurring. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had just complied with Barbara's initial violation notice. I could have moved my truck to a storage facility, paid the monthly fee, and avoided all the stress and legal battles. Life would have been easier in some ways, but it also would have been wrong. It would have sent a message that veterans' rights are negotiable, that HOA boards can ignore state law if they're persistent enough, and that intimidation tactics work. More importantly, it would have set a precedent affecting every other veteran in the neighborhood and potentially in HOAs across Arizona. Sometimes doing the right thing is hard. Sometimes it requires fighting battles you'd rather not fight, spending money you'd rather not spend, and enduring stress you'd rather not endure. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is a world where petty tyrants like Barbara Kleinfeld can abuse power without consequences, where rights exist on paper but not in practice, and where ordinary people are too intimidated to stand up for themselves. I'm proud that I fought back. I'm proud that I won. And I'm proud that my fight made things better not just for me, but for every veteran who lives in an HOA community in Arizona. My cuck remains in my driveway, a testament to the principle that laws exist to protect people, not just to give busybodies power over their neighbors. It's not the fanciest vehicle on the block, but it's mine, it's legal, and it represents something important. The idea that service to your country means something, and that veterans deserve to be treated with respect, not harassed by HOA Karens with too much time on their hands and too little understanding of the law. Every time I walk past my truck, I remember the battle it took to keep it there, and I feel satisfaction knowing that Barbara's attempt to abuse her authority was not only defeated, but resulted in her permanent removal from power and a criminal record that will follow her for years. Justice isn't always swift, but when it comes, it's sweet. The neighborhood continues to thrive. New families move in regularly, attracted by the reasonable HOA fees and the community atmosphere. Veterans are explicitly welcomed now, with several active duty personnel from nearby military installations choosing to live in Sagebrush Hills specifically, because they know their rights will be respected. Patricia has served 2 terms as HOA president and will likely be re-elected again. She's transformed the position from a platform for petty tyranny into actual community leadership. Under her guidance, the HOA has completed several successful projects, including renovating the community pool, adding new walking trails, and establishing a neighborhood watch program that actually focuses on safety rather than measuring how many inches someone's grass exceeds the preferred height. Life is good in Sagebrush Hills now. The sun rises over the desert mountains every morning, painting the stucco houses in shades of gold and orange. My cuck sits in my driveway, ready for whatever adventures the day might bring. And I live with the satisfaction of knowing that when I was challenged, when my rights were threatened, I stood my ground and won. That's the real lesson of this whole experience. Rights are only as strong as people's willingness to defend them. Laws only matter if they're enforced. And communities are only as healthy as the standards they set for leadership. Barbara Kleinfeld thought she could bully me into compliance because that's what had worked for her in the past. She was used to people backing down, accepting her authority, and avoiding conflict. She never expected someone to fight back with documentation, legal knowledge, and determination. Her mistake was assuming that service members and veterans are accustomed to following orders without question. What she didn't understand is that we're also trained to think critically, to know our rights, and to stand up against injustice. We don't blindly follow illegal orders, and we don't accept abuse of authority, whether it comes from a military superior or an HOA president. The fight was worth it. Every moment of stress, every dollar spent on legal fees, every hour spent documenting violations and researching case law. It was all worth it because it resulted in a better community, stronger protections for veterans, and the removal of someone who was abusing power. My cuck will likely sit in my driveway for many more years. It's a reliable vehicle that I maintain carefully. But more than that, it's a symbol of a battle fought and won, a reminder that ordinary people can challenge authority when that authority oversteps its bounds, and a testament to the idea that veterans' rights matter. And if another HOA Karen ever tries to challenge those rights in Sagebrush Hills, they'll find a whole community ready to push back, because we've learned that standing together against abuse of power is how you build a community worth living in.